Great. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fourth event in our Environmentalist in Residence series. My name is Joanna Kerr. I'm a librarian with the London Public Library. We will be recording the session today. My apologies. We'll be recording the session today, and we will send the recording about a week after our event. Please know that if you have your camera on right now, you will be seen in parts of the recording, but not your screen name. So that's just for you to know. Welcome to everyone. We would like to start by taking this time together to acknowledge that we in London, Ontario are speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Lenape, and Neutral peoples. This land is covered by several treaties, including Treaty 6, the London Township Treaty of 1796. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples endure in Canada. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank the generations of peoples who have taken care of this land. Together and going forward, may we all recognize our own responsibility in the stewardship of this land. If you would like to read or learn more about Treaty 6, the library holds materials on this and other treaties. Thank you for reflecting on this acknowledgement. So today, our environmentalist in residence, Dr. Andrea Boyer, there she is in conversation with Tom Cull of Antler River Rally, who's with us here on the screen right now too, and Daniella Klisper of the Lake Huron Centre for Coastal Conservation. There she is. And we'll also hear from Pat Donnelly from the City of London. And we have my fellow librarian, Lily, who's helping out behind the scenes. Thanks, Lily. And we'll be screening this week's video of one of London's environmentally significant areas and featuring local groups that you can connect with after this event. And we want to hear your questions, which you can type into the chat box at any time during today's program. We'll be drawing prizes after our program for rain barrel, composter, as well as gift cards from Green Economy London businesses like Booch and Reimagine Co. Lily or I may check with you in the chat if we don't have contact information for you from our registration list based on your Zoom screen name. I'd like to thank our partners. This program would not be possible without the support of the Houston Family Foundation. And we thank the City of London for their ongoing support and partnership in this program, including supplying some of the prizes for our events. And now I will introduce our 2021 Environmentalist in Residence, Dr. Andrea Boyer. Andrea holds a PhD in biology and with a specialization in environment and sustainability. Her graduate research looked at how changing weather patterns can affect the physiology and behavior of birds. Andrea is now a professor at Fanshawe College and assistant professor at Western University. She has contributed her expertise for 5 years with the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee that provides technical advice to the City of London on environmentally significant projects. She also volunteers with BirdSafe UWO, the Bird Friendly City Team, and Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup events. Over to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Joanna, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's a beautiful day outside, but we're so happy that you're joining us for a lot of great information that we're about to throw your way. So before we get started, as we focus today on shorelines and riverbanks, we'd like to start by inviting you just to recall your earliest memory of a waterway. So whether this is skipping stones on a lake or canoeing in a river, floating in an ocean, we're just going to take a few seconds here as you reflect on your memories and your relationships with water before we hear from our guests and each of their connections with water. So we'll just take a few seconds here and invite you to do a little bit of reflection before we jump in today. Feel free to just think of this on your own. You can also share your thoughts in the chat if you wish. But again, we'll reconvene in a few seconds here. So if you're just joining us, we're just spending a few seconds here reflecting on the importance of water to you, what your earliest memories are of relating to water, what those most impactful memories are that relate to water. I think probably what a lot of us are thinking about are childhood memories, a lot of positive memories from our past that have really strong connections to waterways. So I'll encourage you to continue thinking about these memories and connections that you have to water. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce our guest today. Daniella Klisper, she's joining us today. She is the Coastal Stewardship Coordinator for Lake Huron Centre for Coastal Conservation. She most recently completed her master's degree in water security from the University of Saskatchewan, where she studied wetland drainage and its important impacts on nutrient loading into water surface water. She now resides in Goderich, Ontario. I'd also like to reintroduce Tom Cull today. Tom, if some of you remember, joined us at our first event at the beginning of the month to launch our program. Tom teaches creative writing at Western University and was also the Poet Laureate for the City of London from 2016 to 2018. Tom's first collection of poems, Bad Animals, was published in 2018 by Insomniac Press. He is also the director of Antler River Rally, a grassroots environmental group working to protect and restore Deshkan Zebi, also known as the Thames River. Tom is also an editor for Watch Your Head, an anthology of creative works devoted to climate justice. Tom is going to be starting things off for us today with a presentation that he has prepared. So I will reintroduce Tom to share his thoughts here.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Hello to Daniela as well, and all the folks at LPL and Patrick Donnelly, and all of you joining us today. Thank you for having me. I am going to try some magic here called share screen, and we'll see how that goes. Okay. Okay. Can everyone see? Can I just get a thumbs up if the, okay, great. And I found out the other day that like you can actually minimize the photo of me and maximize the photo of the presentation on your computers, which, yeah, I just learned as we were all learning this technology. So I want to talk to you today about Antler River Rally, this group that I co-founded with my partner, Miriam Love, who's pictured there, and she's also in the chat today, or not in the session today. So we started this group, we're starting our 10th anniversary of river cleanups. This coming summer is our 10th anniversary. So if you'll indulge me with a bit of an origin story, we started this group 10 years ago. We were walking along the river a lot when we both just kind of recently moved to London from different places, and we noticed a lot of garbage, and I was constantly pointing it out on our walks and being grumpy about it. And one day Miriam said, you know, there's an alternative to this. We could actually start, you know, picking it up. So that's what we did. We posted a little notice on Facebook and said, hey, we're going down to Carfrae Park. We're going to do some cleanup. Please join us. And we'll be there tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so that was our first cleanup. And one person showed up. We had our friend Jeff Vogt showed up for our very first cleanup. But we spent a couple of hours on the river and had a great day and collected a lot of garbage. And the next day in the London Free Press, we got this story, Thames has a Facebook friend. And so this was our beginnings. You know, you always have to have the social media angle. But yeah, so this was our very first cleanup, and it had one member. And since that time, I should also say it didn't have just one. And we had our 2-year-old, Miriam and I have now an 11-year-old. Our 2-year-old was at that cleanup too, cleaning up. And since that first cleanup, we've held one cleanup every month on the third Saturday of every month for 10 years now. And we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of Londoners, and we've pulled tons and tons, probably hundreds of tons of garbage out of the river and from along its banks. These are just some of the pictures of those cleanups. We've worked with faith groups. This was one that we did with the London Mosque and First St. Andrew's United Church. We've worked with summer camps. We've done cleanups with summer camps. This is a cleanup that we did at Chippewa of the Thames First Nation with the Antler River Guardians, a group of Indigenous youth who are working on environmental issues. So we did that cleanup. And then of course, we've worked with local businesses that are interested in, coming out to the river and contributing their muscle to getting this river of ours cleaned up. So so that's our primary kind of activity. It's kind of direct, hands-on, citizen engaged grassroots environmentalism. And that is how we kind of began. And as we've evolved, we've also kind of started getting to work on some of the broader problems that our river faces. And so I just want to kind of talk about some of the challenges that the Thames Dashkan Zibi, as it's known in Anishinaabe-Moan, that means Antler River, because of the way the river antlers at the forks. It looks like an antler. So the first, and most kind of obvious challenge we face is just the sheer amount of garbage that makes it into the river or along its banks. And I would like to tell you that in the last 10 years, we have seen the problem decrease. Unfortunately, that is not the case. We are not living sustainably as a society. And one of the results of that is so much garbage that is ending up in our river. I like to use this shopping cart as a kind of symbol of our consumerist tendencies, which are unsustainable. And so if you are at this time of year, by the way, driving along any of the major roadways or the on-ramps or off-ramps of the 401, you're going to see tons and tons of garbage that has just been jettisoned out of car windows and have made it into our green spaces. And so that's, the first challenge, and the first thing that we want to kind of talk to people about is thinking about the way that we consume and the way that our throwaway culture a lot of times ends up in the river. And then of course, this leads to the problem of plastics. The plastics, we're a source for plastics, and as Daniella will probably maybe talk about, microplastics ending up in lakes because of they're entering the water streams and then they break down. And here you can see a picture of a nest that I found along the river last year, and almost the entire outside of it is constructed out of plastic material that the birds have found. So these plastics are entering into our environment and is a great source of pollution. The problem of COVID, of course, has only exacerbated a lot of our environmental issues. We're finding a lot of medical waste, including masks, in the river right now. And I noticed that I'm also seeing, as I'm sure you all are as well, lots of discarded masks just in the roads and in our green spaces. The whole city is a river when it rains. And so a lot of the destination of garbage that are on our streets is the river. So that's a concern of ours, and we're picking up a lot of masks recently. Medical waste also associated with addictions and mental health. When we first started doing this work, we worked with community organizations and community groups to get needle bins installed along the riverways. Sometimes we pick up thousands of sharps in one cleanup, and of course all the paraphernalia associated with that as part of a harm reduction strategy. And so here we're thinking about the environment as also having to be a part of that harm reduction strategy. And so we were able to get some needle bins installed, which diverts that medical waste away from the river. In London, of course, we talk a lot about the issue of homelessness. And so our group is now thinking and talking about the intersections of, social and environmental issues as they coalesce at the river. People who are experiencing homelessness do not create garbage. It's a system of homelessness that creates garbage, and there are environmental costs to that system as well. And so in our cleanups, we work with local groups like London Cares, and we never go into active camps and clean up active camps where people are living, but we try to, we respect those boundaries, but we also try to help remove some of the garbage, or any, when those camps are left behind, we can kind of get in there and clean them up. And as the problem of homelessness, rises in London, we've got over maybe, I think last year, 1,000 people living outside rough. Those environmental costs as well increase. So we work on that issue as well. We see illegal dumping in the Thames. People still sometimes think of the river as a place to get rid of their garbage. And so that's sometimes we find lots of car parts, we find lots of just regular household garbage that has been dumped down the sides of banks. And then, we also have been in another challenge that the river faces, of course, are human-made obstructions. And we were very vocal and active in calling for the decommission of Springbank Dam. Any kind of dam, especially recreational ones that are absolutely necessary for flood control. These obstructions are negatively impact river ecology and river health. Many of you, of course, will be aware of the problem of sewage or partially treated sewage in the river. And so we are always educating ourselves on this issue and educating the public and going to council and knocking on doors and talking about how the city is addressing this problem, which they are through sewage master plans and pollution prevention control plans. But this is a issue that people should be aware of, because as this article says, last year, 260 million liters of sewage, some treated, some not, hit the river in about 32 incidents. So this is also an issue that we keep our eye on, and we advocate around. Part of what we do as an organization is we get our hands dirty and we get garbage out of the river, but we also educate. And we try to advocate. So we visit schools and talk to children and give presentations like this one, but we also go to council and we protest and we hit the streets and we do what we can to talk about all of these issues as they are related. Of course, another big one that is facing not only our river, but the lakes is phosphorus loading and algae blooms. I won't talk much about those because this is not my area of expertise, and it is Daniela's, so I will leave that there. Of course, habitat loss, deforestation, and wetlands and wetland loss are also huge problems. But a little success story here in London is, of course, those two turtles down there are soft shell turtles. And this is one area, thanks to the Upper Thames Conservation Authority and Scott Gillingwater, who has headed up the protection and the reintroduction, not reintroduction, but the protection of this species at risk. And London has a very healthy population of these turtles that we can all go down. I'm sure some of you, as you've walked down along the river in the summertime, you see these turtles, and they are endangered, but because of conservation efforts in the city, they are staging a comeback. So that is a good story. And it's one of the reasons why we do the work that we do. This little friend here is telling me that my time is up. But you'll be, if you're down at the river these days, you'll be hearing these toads singing to one another. And it's just a beautiful time to be down by the river. And I'll just end by telling you that we began as Thames River Rally. And 3 years ago, we changed our name to Antler River Rally because we wanted to not only just acknowledge the name of the river in Anishinaabe, Amoan, Dashkanzibi, and the river's pre-colonial history. But we also wanted to acknowledge that, we also wanted to honor Indigenous rights and Indigenous treaty rights, which are a part of having a healthy river where people can swim, where the water is clean. As we know, the Oneida Nation of the Thames right now is on a boil water advisory because the water that they draw from is on the same water table as Dashkanzibi or the Thames. And so what we do upstream affects sovereign nations downstream, and that's some of our focus now. Is as we start thinking, all of us start thinking about moving from environmentalism to the work of environmental justice. So with that, I will say thank you, and I will pass it back to Andrea.
Thanks so much, Tom. Those pictures are alarming. Great that you have those photos to document all of that garbage cleanup. Now I'd like to invite both Tom and Daniella to join me in our In Conversation series. So it's always great to inform our listeners through presentations, but we'd also like to get to know our speakers in a little bit more detail. So I invite Tom and Daniella to join me in conversation here. My first question goes to you, Tom. So your presentation identified different challenges that the river faces, and also your group's effort to sort of directly meet these challenges. But your work has obviously got to be part of a much bigger effort to improve the health of the river. So what do you see as other important ways that we can meet these challenges? Obviously, in addition to getting out there with a garbage bag and gloves and actually cleaning up the river.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's lots, but I'd focus on one right now. We talk about, upstream solutions and downstream solutions. And I think a really important upstream solution is policy. And talking to our politicians, and every time they knock on our door and ask for our vote, we ask them what they plan to do to ensure that our waterways and our green spaces are protected. I began that kind of talk a little bit talking about consumerism and plastics. We can pick up all the plastics that we want, but if it's still coming from a source, we are never going to be able to really, tackle the problem completely. So we've got to move upstream to where that stuff is coming from. And a lot of that has to do with corporate responsibility and our politicians holding corporations and polluters responsible. And, it's easier, I'll just say this, it's easier to hold other people responsible and hold people upstream responsible when you're holding yourself downstream for being responsible too. So part of that is getting out and getting your hands in the river and pulling that garbage out and thinking about your own consuming practices and making sure that you're not, that your house is in order, and then also, looking at those upstream bigger questions as well.
Yeah, I agree. One of the common things that I say is one of the biggest things we have to change is human psychology. And then that's sort of when human psychology, human behavior, that's when we really start to see these changes related to environmental issues. So Daniella, as hopefully you recall from Daniella's introduction, she's coming to us from the Lake Huron Coastal Conservation Center. So my question for you here is, does Lake Huron face these similar threats to that the Thames River is right now? So things like algae blooms, which Tom briefly mentioned, garbage or plastic, or even loss of wildlife. How does that sort of compare to what we see at the Thames here?
Certainly. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for coming and lending your ears today. I haven't been in London in a while because of the shutdown, but certainly I see that the two waterways would definitely have similar threats, similar stressors. Garbage and plastic wash-up events that Tom mentioned are an issue that we work on the Lake Huron shoreline every year. We typically have a big shoreline cleanup called the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup here in Goderich at the end of April, right about now, probably we would have been having it this Saturday, but we're doing things a little bit differently. We're encouraging solo and household cleanups instead. Some of the other issues that we're facing along the Lake Huron coastline, increased pressure from development as well. On an area that has an already kind of thin natural buffer along the coast. So, and I'm kind of thinking from that Sarnia to Tobermory coastline, so that can have negative impacts for wildlife habitat, wildlife populations, if it's not kind of planned for ahead of time as well. And then you mentioned algal blooms as well, or algal outbreaks. So we do experience some of those as well, and beach closures. Though it's nothing as serious as compared to algal blooms on Lake Erie. So, but it's still something to be mindful of for us, especially a little bit closer to more urban areas as well. There's definitely quite a few, and I'm sure there's many more that Tom can probably chime in on from the Thames River, but yeah.
So many of us are a lot more familiar with the Thames obviously here, but if somebody is interested in learning more about Lake Huron's environment, does the Coastal Center host any online events? So we're doing one online event. We're trying to focus on our more local waterways, but how can people become involved in the Coastal Center's work? Can people volunteer? If many of us don't live on the shores of Lake Huron, maybe you can share a little bit more information about that.
Sure. So we actually have a coastal webinar series coming up for the spring and the summer. So it's all going to be online, and the first webinar takes place May 11th. It'll be evening sessions, 7 to 8 p.m. I believe were the times. And we'll be looking at different topics related to the coast. So the first one on May 11th is relating to plastics and how plastics can impact coastal ecosystems, and we're going to dive into some simple low-cost alternatives on how to break up with our plastic habits as well. Some of the other topics that we're going to cover in the webinars are coastal processes and kind of learning how the shoreline works on Lake Huron, shoreline development. A lot of the time, there's a lot of questions as to who to reach out for help when it comes to building something closer to the shore. And we'll have another one on an introduction on shorebirds. If there's any birders on the call right now, perfect. Along with what we call a coastal plant boot camp as well. So I'm actually gonna bring some plants from the field in the summer, and I'll have them with me up on the webinar that I can pinpoint in addition to our PowerPoint slides, I guess.
Great.
So yeah, those that can be all found on our website, lakehuron.ca, and that'll be kind of under the events tab. And when it comes to volunteering, I mentioned beach cleanup events, which are looking a little different this year. We have other volunteer opportunities like restoration and invasives pulling. Again, it's going to look a bit different this year depending on what the restrictions are like in the summer. But I would say that, I mean, most of us are maybe on the call will be visiting a Lake Huron shoreline or beach at some point this summer just to get away probably for a bit. So even I would say to kind of challenge yourself when you're going to the beach that with yourself or your family to bring those non-single use items. So stuff that that you're gonna use for another trip. Last year, we saw an influx of folks coming to the shore, and with that, there was a lot of kind of floaties, blow up toys, all that, which is fine. It's just it was kind of maybe bought for one day and then discarded, and chairs and even barbecues. Surprisingly, someone had left a couple of portable barbecues by the garbage, which was interesting. So that's that takes a bit more costly to purchase. So I would definitely say if you're at the beach to always think about what you're bringing down and what you're leaving. And also when you're there at the shore, doing kind of a 2-minute beach cleanup of the general area that you're in. You know, it's pretty interesting what you can find on the sand, and making sure that you're not kind of walking over dunes and in sensitive habitat, but trying to kind of do your part in the area that you're visiting.
Yeah, that's great. And sort of going back to that point, if we can hopefully change some of that psychology, some of that human thinking, this is really a way that we can tackle many different issues. So just being mindful of our time here, I'd like to now invite Daniella to share the presentation that she has put together for us. She'll educate us a little bit more about the Coastal Centre's work. So I will give it over to you, Daniella, to share your screen.
Okay, try this here. Perfect. Can you see the first slide?
Looks good.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrea. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. And thank you again for lending your attention today. Goddard has had a fairly sunny morning going into the afternoon, so I was thinking most of us would want to be outside for a bit. But I'm going to speak a little bit today about one of our volunteer programs that takes place on the shores of Lake Huron. And so for those that don't know about the Coastal Centre, we were established in 1998 with the goals of protecting and restoring Lake Huron's coastal environment, supporting a healthy coastal ecosystem through education, through restoration, and through research projects. And we actually have one of our co-founders on the call today, Pat Donnelly, just a single Pat out here. And fitting with the webinar series today and the underlying theme of climate change, the Coastal has had a fairly long history of focusing on climate change within our project. So the logo on the screen that you'll see represents 4 coastal characteristics, and the yellow sunset or sun at the top actually signifies the important role that the sun's energy plays, especially when it comes to climate change. So just kind of showing how ingrained it is in the vision and the mission of the Coastal Centre. And so you might think, why I'm here to present about a project taking place on the shores of Lake Huron, but there's actually a pretty strong connection between the City of London and Lake Huron. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a map of Lake Huron. And that big red dot near Grand Bend is actually the Lake Huron's primary water supply facility. So it pulls and treats more than 100 megaliters of water per day. And that water is actually sent to numerous municipalities around the coast, but also London, and that's via a pipeline. So London actually, 80% of London's drinking water comes from Lake Huron via this pipeline, and then the remaining 20% actually come from Lake Erie, which I think is also through a pipeline, but perhaps someone can correct me after that. And on the right-hand side, we have a map of the Thames River watershed. And although it's not directly influencing Lake Huron, the Thames River is an important source of water that's influencing both Lake St. Clair and also Lake Erie. So again, kind of connecting that what we do in London does impact our neighbors downstream as well. And to continue with the theme of reflecting on our connection of water, I think it is important to think about some of the ways that we value our waterways around us and how they shape our lifestyle and our daily actions, which we've been kind of talking about. I'm sure there's some that relate to the Thames River that are missing on this slide here. Could be, again, looking at wildlife populations as we're walking by the river and some others. So we can perhaps chat about those a bit later. So our Coast Watcher program, it launched in 2005, and we are developing a long-term database from shoreline observations and shoreline measurements. So we're officially kind of in our teenage years of the program. We're at 16 years of data at this point, and we use what we call a citizen science approach, which means a volunteer approach to collecting our data when it comes to shoreline parameters, shoreline monitoring. So we're kind of collecting snapshots of the shoreline in time, ideally. And this year's program is funded by RBC, Tech for Nature. So they're actually, through their grant, we're going to be able to develop a mobile app to make this program a little bit more efficient. And also we're funded by Bruce Power and also Toyota Boschco. So what do we actually measure? What do our coast watchers actually measure on the shore? They're looking at atmospheric conditions, that be it air and water temperature, wind speeds, wind directions, wave heights. One of our coast watchers on the screen there actually has a Kestrel device and a thermometer on that line, and he's getting ready to go and take some measurements in the shore, in the shores of Lake Huron. And we're also bringing back our microplastic sampling this year. So with that, we ask our coast watchers to take two samples, one at the beginning of the season, water samples, one at the beginning of the season and one at the end. And then we actually filter those for microfibers, microfilaments, and fragments. And that becomes a part of our in-house data. And we hope to build on top of that data for in years to come. Some of the other observations that our coast watchers make, wildlife reports, both species that are alive, like the sandpiper in the photo, but also mortalities as well, like one of the cormorant that you see there. And that includes species at risk, along with invasive species. And some other parameters they look at include storm damage and, again, algal bloom events, be it in the water or on the shore as well. So there's quite a breadth of knowledge that comes from this and data that comes from this. Our coast watchers are provided with a training session and a monitoring protocol to help kind of identify some of the main species that can be seen. And we encourage folks to take photos. This is why we have so many good photos to share with you here today, including one of the Ziploc bag on the bottom there is actually was a pellet event. So we call them nurdles, but once in a while we'll have these microplastics washing up on shore in the sand, and we actually have our coast watchers try to see if any of those events, those plastic events, are happening near their monitoring site. So what we've been seeing over the years is that more people are interested in contributing to science while also engaging with their community members. This year we're at 160 volunteers already, so we're only increasing at this point. Not sure if COVID has anything to do with that right now or not, but either way, it's great to see. And the results direct our programs and the projects that we put on. So that could be beach cleanups, education programs, or municipal partnerships. And the data is also shared with different regional, provincial, and national databases. So that could be the invasive species that folks see, go to the Invasive Species Center, or species at risk are a couple examples there. And I apologize if you can hear my cat. I think he's trying to get into the room here in the back. And so here's a map of our coast watchers from 2020. So you can see there's lots of folks along the shoreline going up into Georgian Bay as well. So it gives us kind of a nice glimpse of different areas of the Lake Huron coastline and what's been happening over the years. And so we got a little curious. In 2018, we did a survey and we had a chance to learn a bit more about our coast watcher participants and what drove their interest in the program. 25% said it was interest in conservation and nature. 24 said interest in protecting the lake. 16 were looking for a learning experience. 13 were looking for community involvement. 13% were interested in working with the Coastal Center, and then 8% were interested in gaining experience in the environmental field. So that's typically our younger environmental professionals or high school students looking to see what it's all about. And so just to wrap up here, improving our coastal environmental health is an effort for all levels, But we've noticed that our grassroots actions are really, truly powerful. We're seeing community champions along the shoreline. They're leading cleanups. They're getting to know the plants and animals at the shore, and learning a little bit about some of the stewardship efforts to maintain a healthy shoreline. And then many times when your neighbors see something happening like that, whether it be a restoration project or just walking the beach and talking about what's happening at the shore, that word of mouth and that sharing that knowledge kind of motivates folks and is inspirational. So the chances of folks kind of embracing those kind of alternatives and changes are higher. So I definitely like to encourage everyone here to think a little bit about out of the box, and embrace alternatives when it comes to shoreline stewardship practices, and communicate with your fellow friends, your neighbors, and that way we can kind of encourage positive changes that are related to our waterways. With that, I'll leave our website on the slide here for those that are interested in, and do visit the Lake Huron shoreline to see what other kind of programs we offer. But my email's on the bottom there as well for the Coast Watcher program, so feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniela. Thanks, Andrea and Tom. What I'm going to do now is poll everyone so we can get your thoughts on your concerns in relation to waterways. So I'm going to launch a poll, and you should see it pop up on your screen. And from there, if you could just indicate your answer. So the question is, what are your biggest concerns with our waterways? You can choose multiple answers or all of the above, but when you see it pop up there, just indicate which one or multiples that you are concerned about. So is everyone seeing that pop up on their screen? Okay. Great. Alrighty, so I may not be able to see the results here for some reason. So Andrea, I might ask you if you could maybe chat about the results, but I'm going to end it. I'll just wait a few more seconds and then we can end the poll, and that'll be a minute. And then I'm going to try and share the results here. All right, yeah, I think for some reason it's not visible to me. Andrea, are you able to talk to the results?
Yeah, so it looks like, it looks like we were able to get more than one response. So when we're talking about the biggest concern here, 67% looks like plastics and garbage is of the most concern here, second of which being water quality. And I think those two really highlight the thoughts that both Daniela and Tom discussed with us today. Of course, all of the above is something of concern. Within London, talking about flooding and erosion, that's something that we certainly deal with. But it looks like the majority of results here, the main concerns are plastics and also water quality.
Thanks, Andrea. All right, I'm going to stop sharing that. And now we are going to take your questions. So we don't have a lot of time for questions, and I think we've been answering them in the chat as well. So I'm going to see if there's anything that hasn't been answered in the chat. Feel free to look in the chat as well for some of those questions and answers that have been there. But the first thing, actually, Daniela, it came up in your presentation. I wanted to ask what a megaliter was.
I will have to look up exactly the conversion of that.
Trick question. Yeah, I just thought, I think I know what a liter is, but what on earth is a megaliter? But that's fine. It just came into my head as I was listening to you. But I'll just share that in the chat, we've been hearing about dams and the idea of recreational dams and how they could be problematic, but Pat was able to respond to that, to explain that that dams have several purposes, and the important ones are related to protecting us from flooding, but some in London only have a recreational purpose, such as Springbank Dam, and there are historic dams on smaller creeks that serve no purpose anymore and block fish passage, and therefore they can be harmful to aquatic life. So that was one of the questions there. I'll just go through to see. Oh, there you go. A megaliter is 1 million liters. Well, that I could have probably figured that out. All right. So here is a question, Tom and Daniela. How are you adapting to the lockdown restrictions with your volunteer events and citizen science programs? So Tom, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, how we're adapting. So currently, we've suspended our cleanups for April, and we're hoping to start back up again in May. Last year, when we were in the red zone, anything but what we're in right now, we can operate our cleanups. So we were having people register. When it was that we could only have 10 people gathering outside, we'd have people register, and when we got to 10 people, then we would go ahead with our cleanups. At one point it was 20 people, so we would just do a registration process when we usually would just say, come on out. So we were able to do that. We social distance, we wore masks, we had, COVID protocols, we cleaned down all of our equipment, and we took all the precautions that we were advised to do. So we were able to hold cleanups all through last summer, and this summer we hope to do as well, and into the fall. And yeah, I hate to miss April, especially March and April cleanups, because there's no undergrowth and you can just see the garbage. And as soon as May and June hit, explosion of grass and shrubs and everything, and so it kind of hides that garbage, but we'll do what we can. And so yeah, we're making it through, and I love how the city has also adapted. The Clean and Green project goes on, and it says what the city is telling people is get out there. We can't hold these kind of big cleanups, but your household can. You've got a garbage bag, you can get down to the river and get garbage. So it's a little bit more DIY, and we've all had to scramble, and everyone is making adjustments, but we're doing it. And I think that's great because, COVID, I would love to see us get to the other side of COVID, of course. But when we do, one thing that we've kind of pressed pause on is climate change, the environment, degradation, plastics, all these kinds of things. And those are going to come back into the fore. So we'll be ready to go.
Thanks, Tom. Daniela?
And we've been having a fairly similar message in that our big cleanups are not occurring this year. So we're encouraging solo and household cleanups. And I wanted just to add to Tom's point that even if you are going out alone or with a small group within or from your house, you can still, that data that you collect is still very valuable. And the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup does still allow you to enter that data in, which then goes into their national database. So if that's of interest, they have a card that you can bring with you to track what you're finding, be it type of plastics and type of garbage. That data is very, very valuable going forward. So we're still encouraging that, and we're encouraging folks to go to the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup website and registering and entering that data in. And I just wanted to ask Tom, what was in the past, what was the most unique item that you would have found along one of the cleanups?
Yeah, we get asked that all the time. I always want to say, like, we found a chest containing gold bullion from pirates of the 15th century. But we never find anything great like that. We just find a lot of garbage. Sometimes we find tools, and whoever found it can take it home and fix it up. And there was, I guess a couple of summers ago, we found a boat that someone made, and it looked great, but they had no, I think they had no experience of actually how to build a boat. There was just a lot of nails and a lot of lumber involved.
Oh no.
It took about 8 of us to haul it up out of the bank. It probably weighed like half a ton. I would have liked to have been there when they launched it, because I think where we found it is where they launched it to the bottom of the river. So that was one thing. How about you?
2 years ago, a toilet seat in very good shape, surprisingly.
Yeah, we find a lot of toilets in various needs of repair.
Thanks, Daniela and Tom. So that's all the time we have for questions right now. I am making note of another question, and we can certainly respond directly to the person who asked it. But right now, I'm going to hand it back to Andrea, and we'll take a look at our video of the week.
Yeah, so we're now going to preview our weekly virtual environmentally significant area, or ESA visit. So if you've been following along for each month throughout the month of April, I've been visiting an ESA within London and showing you some of those unique features that I find. So the goal here is really just to highlight the amazing ESAs that we have in London, and to just encourage you to participate in our Environmentalist in Residence April Challenge, which I will explain a little bit more about in the video. So I'm just going to share the video here, and we can talk a little bit about some of the features that I found once we finish.
Hi everybody, it's Dr. Andrea Boyer, your 2021 Environmentalist in Residence through the London Public Library in collaboration with the City of London. Today for our virtual ESA visit, we're visiting Killala. Killala is home to many diverse habitat types, things like meadows and ravines, floodplains, mature forest, and also of course the Thames River. This is continuing on our April Environmentalist in Residence Challenge, where we are encouraging you to get out and visit as many ESAs within the City of London as you can. As I've mentioned previously, we hope that you are taking photos or at the ESA or selfies in front of the ESA sign, uploading them to social media with the hashtag LDNESA, for your chance to win some pretty cool environmentally related prizes. Really happy to see that so many of you have already been participating in the challenge, but April's not finished. We hope that you continue to post your photos to social media. As I mentioned, we're going to enter Killala Woods today, and we'll see what we can find. Within the ESA, there's trails on both sides of the Thames River. This area of the Thames has a wide variety of species that you can find, including a lot of diverse species of warm water fish, many of which, about 3, 4, or 5, have jumped out of the water since I've been standing here. These really noisy birds are kingfishers, which you'll commonly see on the banks of the Thames at Killala. Killala has about 10 kilometers of multi-use trails, including a lot of bridges that cross over streams and tributaries that lead out to the Thames. One of the resident species at Killala are beavers. I didn't spot a beaver today, but I did spot a dam, a very large dam that was created by beavers. Beavers have a really big ecological impact because they're able to create these massive dams, which basically block off the river, creating additional wetlands and ponds. These beavers were really busy. There's about 4 or 5 deer across the creek here. One really important thing is to make sure you're never getting too close to the white-tailed deer at any ESA, and also that you're never feeding them your own food. They get enough. He spotted me. April's a great time to get out and walk the trails in many ESAs because it's very warm, there's lots to see, and there's not a lot of bugs out yet. Make sure when you're out using the trails that you're properly disposing things like masks, which cause potential harm to a lot of wildlife. This is true not only for masks, but other litter in general. Hopefully you can see the mink running away. Thank you for joining me on my virtual visit to Kalali this week, and we'll see you next time.
So there's lots that I found on my visit this week. Just really briefly, as you saw in that video, beaver activity is really common in a lot of the ESAs, as well as many other areas of the city not even designated. So we have to remember that beavers are really important keystone species that create dams as part of their survival, but also it can be potentially devastating with respect to things like infrastructure and flooding within our urban areas. The good news is that within London, we have a humane wildlife conflict policy that specifically addresses beavers. We have lots of examples of UTRCA and also city staff working with the beavers to address those challenges that I mentioned. We will hear a lot more about the effects of urban beavers in our next event on Wednesday, April 28th from 7 to 8. This is our London's Environmentally Significant Areas webinar featuring Emily Williamson. She is the City of London ecologist, and also Brandon Williamson. He is the land management technician with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. I'll send it back over to you, Joanna.
Thanks, Andrea. All right, in the last minutes, I will share my screen. I'm going to invite Pat Donnelly, who is the City of London's Watershed Program Manager. Sorry, I'm just going to make one other change before we do that, Pat. A few too many things open on the old screen here. Perfect. Okay. And there we go.
And if you can allow me to start talking before you get the slide up, we actually have covered
Great idea.
Covered a whole bunch of stuff, and yeah, really great presentations, Tom and Daniela. Thanks for those. It's already been mentioned that the underlying theme is climate change of this whole webinar series. And just to remind people that the city has declared a climate emergency. Our council did that in December of 2019. This is the website, Get Involved London. It was also in the chat box, and it's where you will find all the information that we are collecting and all the opportunities for input. And definitely that's something that we're very fortunate, the amount of input that we're getting. Lots of great comments, lots of groups that have formed just in response to this climate emergency too. So I'll put a shout out to the Climate Action London. I think Bob Morrison is on the call today. He's one of the members. A great opportunity for volunteering. If you're interested in giving us your comments, there's a website here, also an email address. And if I get Joanna just to go to the next slide, I'll just mention that on the website, there's 2 tools, because we're now doing everything virtually and having to get input from people virtually as well over the internet, not allowing us to get out to summer festivals and that kind of thing. The one thing I'll just mention is the Climate Action Plan Simulator is soon to come off the website. So for those of us live here today, you have probably this next week to actually provide your input. And it is a very interesting tool. The simulator provides you the opportunity to, I guess, make believe with regards to if you were king and ruled the world, wanted to move everything to electric vehicles or all our buses to electric vehicles, see what that impact has with regards to our target of net zero greenhouse gases by 2050. So that's definitely something that has been really useful for us. It's also been used in other areas of Canada. Salt Spring Island has used it. Even Perth County, which is north of London, has used it as part of their tools. The last one I'll just mention is the carbon footprint, called Project Neutral, and that allows you to check your greenhouse gas emissions from your own household. And in London, that's really important because more than 50% of our greenhouse gases comes from the vehicles that we drive, we as in citizens of London, and our houses, how we heat them and cool them, the energy that goes into it. So if we're trying to reduce greenhouse gases, it really is a behavior change that we're looking for. So those are the two things I just wanted to mention. And again, thanks so much for everyone who's attended today. And I hope you got lots of good information out of it. I certainly did. Thanks, Joanna.
Thanks so much, Pat. All right, we will conclude as we do each session. So we focus on groups in London that you can learn more from or participate with related to each program. And tonight, of course, we have to include Antler River Rally. You've heard about it from Tom, a volunteer group that organizes monthly cleanups. And you can visit their website listed on the slide, antlerriverrally.ca, for future cleanup dates, locations and times, and also to join their mailing list so you can get that information firsthand. Next, Thames River Anglers Association. This is a local volunteer club that works to protect and sustain a diverse multi-species fishery on the Thames River for over 25 years. Their members have helped to educate and improve the quality of the fishery through stream improvement projects and their seasonal trout hatchery. If anyone would like to learn more about the organization, they can go to the website there, anglers.org. And something that Londoners, as friends of the river and its inhabitants, can do is to make the shoreline a better place when you leave than when you arrived. As they say, the same goes for the fish in the river. If you enjoy harvesting a fish from time to time, it can be rewarding to look for ways to contribute back to the fishery for the benefit you've received. So check out that website. And lastly, we have the Thames Talbot Land Trust, which protects, conserves, and restores nature within Elgin, Middlesex, Oxford, and Perth counties, contributing to a stable climate, human well-being, and healthy habitats for all species. TTLT is a nonprofit charitable organization with a vision to create a network of permanently protected areas that are rich in biodiversity, sustain life, and nourish a sense of wonder and inspiration for all people. They currently protect more than 1,900 acres of land and counting, which are home to at least 50 species at risk. You can volunteer with them, helping to remove invasive plant species, all the way to collecting seeds for restoration, maintaining trails, or helping with gardening. If you go to their website, you can look for volunteering details. And one of their upcoming events is Birding for Beginners, a Zoom webinar on May the 3rd. And you can register there on their website. So thank you to all these groups for the work that you do. And now I will pass it back to Andrea for some last words.
Thanks, Joanna. I would just like to thank our guests once more, Daniela and Tom, for joining us this.
Shoot, sorry, Andrea.
Sorry, I got muted for a minute. Just thanking Daniela and Tom. All the information today presented has been very insightful. Thank you to both. Hopefully, many of our viewers are feeling inspired to go do some, as we were saying, DIY river cleanups. As a reminder for all of you, our ESA challenge is still going on throughout the month of April. Even if you've already submitted a photo, the more you submit, the more opportunities you have to win prizes. Use that hashtag LDNESA on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And again, share your pictures at London's ESAs. Finally, I already briefly mentioned it, but I hope you're able to register for our final session on Wednesday next week, April 28th from 7 to 8 p.m. This is our final webinar where we're talking all about London's ESAs. We're being joined by Emily Williamson, the ecologist through the City of London, and also Brandon Williamson, who works with UTRCA. We'll be shining a light on the ESAs within London, discussing those impacts on ESAs, and also talking about how can we potentially designate more areas of ESAs within London.
All right. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your Saturday. Bye.
Hi, folks.